December 3rd, 2015, we learned the heartbreaking news that legendary Stone Temple Pilots frontman Scott Weiland had died at just the age of 48. Now, at the time, his death was ruled to be an accidental overdose, but now in a new interview, his widow is saying that's not so. She says there's a lot more to the story in this situation, and she had some very interesting comments to share. But first, let's look back on the circumstances surrounding that heartbreaking death from the legendary Stone Temple Pilots frontman. Now, this is an article from Billboard which reveals the final months of Scott Weiland, and as many of you know, he was dealing with a prolonged issue with substance abuse that was heartbreaking, and as well as some mental illness issues that he was facing. It says, the last time Jamie Weiland saw her husband Scott alive, the couple spent a romantic Thanksgiving day dining at an Italian restaurant in New York. The night before, November 25th, the former Stone Temple Pilots and Velvet Revolver frontman headlined the nearby Gramercy Theater with his backing band, the Wildabouts. I think maybe I knew I was never going to see him again, she said. We couldn't get enough of each other. It was very powerful. Now, tragically, just 1 week later, Weiland would be found deceased on his tour bus. And one of the things this article points out is that Weiland had a number of very significant personal issues going on at the time of his death. It says his history of heroin addiction was well documented, but the musician hadn't used the opioid in 13 years. But what was less known, that the last 10 months of Weiland's life, a series of turbulent episodes that included a close friend's death, the cancer diagnoses of his mother and father, severe financial troubles, estrangement from his children, and self-medication, as well as mental illness, were all factors in his life at that time, tragically. Now, those of you who remember that 2015 tour with the Wildabouts, there were videos surfacing of Scott Weiland performing that were pretty troubling. And as it notes, it says in April, a video of Weiland failing at a painfully stilted off-key rendition of Stone Temple Pilots' #1 track, Vaseline, went viral. And the suspicion was that one of music's most notorious junkies was back on the substance, but it turned out that it was actually his prescribed dosage of antipsychotic drug that was causing issues for him. And Weiland had so much to deal with in a short period of time. It says on Father's Day, he learned that his biological father had prostate cancer, which is very serious, and his mother had progressive cancer. So these were both very devastating for him. He had also lost his only brother, Michael, back in 2007. So his guitarist said he was sad about his mom. They even say that he broke down crying on the street before a sound check in San Diego. We were just holding him like, it's all right, brother. Now, one of the things at the time with those videos that surfaced from those Scott Weiland performances where people were questioning why he even needed to tour after having such a successful career, selling over 16 million records, but multiple trips to rehab, multiple divorces, and serious financial troubles basically required him to be on the road continuously, which ultimately magnified his issues. It says Weiland needed the income, which was another major source of anxiety. A Grammy-winning catalog that spanned more than 2 decades. He had sold 16.2 million albums in the U.S., according to Nielsen, but many trips to rehab, child support payments, the expenses of addiction, and 2 divorces had left the entertainer in dire financial straits. Now, this report also details the heartbreaking circumstances surrounding Weiland's death, and said that he had been out drinking with a good friend of his in the band just the night before. It says, on the road, Weiland and bassist Tommy Black were drinking buddies. The two had been out late on December 2nd in Chicago, where the Wildabouts bus stopped after a show in Toronto. Now, the next morning, according to a crew member on the bus, it says Weiland woke up at 9 and used the bathroom before going back to bed. Sometime later, after they had arrived in Bloomington, Minnesota, Black knocked on the singer's door to invite him to breakfast, but Weiland didn't answer. This wasn't unusual as he had slept late. Now, far away in LA, his wife Jamie woke up to a text that said, I'm so in love with my beautiful wife. And she called and texted him but got no response. And it says it wasn't like him not to get back to her, especially on a day off. She said, I just started getting this weird agitated feeling. Then at 7 p.m. in Minnesota, she called the band's tour manager and a former Marine who promised that he was going to wake him up and resolve this situation. So at 8 p.m., he entered the tour bus, which was parked behind a Marriott Courtyard Inn. And so he encounters Weiland. He shook his leg and thought, oh my God, he's not moving. I went to his shoulders and realized he was stiff, he said. And it was only a short time later when a crew member made that heartbreaking call to his wife and said that he had passed away and that he wasn't coming back. And she just fell to the floor in such a heartbreaking situation. Police arrived within minutes. I was in tears. It was like, it's all over. Scott's gone. The band's finished. There's no more music. And we are going home. It's the worst. Now, later on, the autopsy ruled that this was related to an accidental overdose, but According to his widow, she says that's not so. It was actually more complex than that, and there are more details from a recent interview on a podcast. Here's what she had to say. Photographer Jamie Weiland appeared on the Appetite for Distortion podcast to honor her late husband and clear up misconceptions about his death. She said, "I feel like he really does not have the accolades and the respect and the recognition that he absolutely deserves. I feel like when he died, everybody was kind of like, that's tragic. But of course, he overdosed, which he didn't overdose, which I tried to get that point across. He didn't. Because he had drugs in his system, the coroner had to rule it as an overdose. But the truth is, Scott died because the main artery in his left ventricle was 95% blocked. That came from 10 years of heroin use. That came from an entire adult life of chain smoking. His heart stopped. Did he have trace amounts of drugs in his system? He did. Did I know he was using? No, I didn't. Because he lied to me. Because I had caught him before, and it would always be this huge fight, and I would be furious at him and to be doing this stuff, but to also lie to me about it. And I remember even talking to the coroner in Minnesota when everything happened and saying like, how could he lie to me about this again? And the coroner was so kind, and he said, I think he just really didn't want to disappoint you. But yeah, I want to clear up. This was not an overdose. It was not. He was not using heroin. He did not overdose on drugs. His heart stopped because his heart had been through so much abuse because of prior drug use in his life and smoking and heavy drinking. You know, and I tend to think that she's correct about that. If they find trace amounts of drugs in his system, that is going to probably lead to that ruling. And likely it was related to that prolonged drug use in the past from that artery. It's a heartbreaking situation. And another thing I really agree with her about is she says he really doesn't get the respect that he deserves in terms of his contribution for music. He's really a prolific songwriter when you look at the songs that he wrote, and had so much talent and such a unique voice. And he's definitely one that was gone too soon, just at the age of 48. One of the all-time greats, Scott Weiland. That's your latest update here from Rockfeed. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on for the latest news and updates about your favorite bands.